Jan Van Eyck Timeline by Beverly Eddins. In the 1420s, Jan Van Eyck painted the birth of John the Baptist, the crucifixion, and the Last Judgment, and St. Francis receiving the stigmata. The earliest painting is the birth of John the Baptist. You can see that the large red bed leads the viewer's eye to it, and this is where the titular subject John the Baptist lays with his mother. This use of color helps to draw the viewer's eye to the most important part of the piece. In 1426, Jan Van Eyck painted Crucifixion and the Last Judgment. As you can see, this painting has religious iconography, and it is representational of the final judgment by God in the denomination Christianity. In 1427, St. Francis receiving the stigmata was painted, and this painting depicts the story of St. Francis receiving the stigmata, and the stigmata is a religious ritual where people were inflicted with the wounds that Jesus Christ received on the cross. In the 1430s, Jan Van Eyck painted the portrait of Cardinal Albergati, Saint Jerome in his study, and portrait of a young man along with others. Portrait of Cardinal Albergati was a sketch that was painted over with oil paint, and as you can see, it was pretty accurate to the original sketch. Saint Jerome in his study was painted in 1432, and as you can see here, it has a painted frame on it that draws the eye to Saint Jerome and gives the painting a more homely feel. In 1432, Jan Van Eyck painted the portrait of a young man, and as the historical context of the time, this young man was probably very wealthy, as he had a headpiece on, and most people who commission paintings were very wealthy, and to have a portrait painted of you was a show of power. One of Jan Van Eyck's most recognizable and iconic pieces is the Ghent altarpiece, painted in 1432. The Protestant Reformation was going on in Europe, and this painting is now in the Cathedral of St. Bavo. It consists of 12 panels, and all of these panels have some sort of religious iconography that go along with the Christian faith. The three central figures at the top of the painting are the Virgin Mary, Jesus, and John the Baptist, and they are represented above the valley at the bottom of the panel, which represents their divinity and their power over the world. In the 1430s, Jan Van Eyck also painted Man in a Blue Turban and the Ince Hall Madonna. Like the other portrait of a man, the man in the blue turban was most likely a wealthy man, as seen by his headdress and the fact that he commissioned himself a portrait. And the Ince Hall Madonna also goes along with the religious iconography that Jan Van Eyck painted in most of his works, that he had to go along with the Christian faith, depicting Jesus and the Virgin Mary in this painting. Another notable painting that was made by Jan Van Eyck was Portrait of a Man with a Red Turban, painted in 1433. This was thought to be a self-portrait and thought to be a piece for show in Van Eyck's portfolio to demonstrate his abilities to people who might commission him. It has Van Eyck's motto written at the top, "As I Can," and this is part of a quote from religious scholars, saying that, essentially saying that they will try their best. And by Van Eyck saying this, he has cut out the first portion of the quotation, and this is essentially saying that he is the best. Another notable painting is the Arnolfini portrait. As you can see in this portrait, the woman is holding her dress in a stance that would indicate that she is pregnant or alludes to her being pregnant. However, this was not the case because in the 1400s, paintings with pregnant women were taboo, and women were not to be depicted as pregnant in paintings. The subjects of the painting are most likely extremely wealthy, as they had a bed and oranges, and as well as the way they are dressed. They are dressed in a very gallant manner. Some other notable portraits are Portrait of a Man with Carnation in 1435, Portrait of Baudin de Launay, and also in 1435, and Portrait of Giovanni Arnolfini, also in 1435. All these portraits were painted on a stark black background with the attention to realistic details like wrinkles in the skin and folds in clothes. Van Eyck had a very realistic art style that was great for portraits because he focused on the realism in folds of clothing and skin, and also focused on shadows and lighting. The Virgin of Chancellor Roland is also a notable painting, painted in 1435. A man kneels and prays to a woman with child. This woman is the Virgin Mary and her baby Jesus, and as you can see, an angel is placing a crown on the woman's head. As the woman is symbolic of the Virgin Mary, this depicts her divinity and great power, and her symbolism as royalty. The Annunciation was painted in 1435, and it is a painting consisting of foldable panels like the Ghent altarpiece. The outside of the painting depicts two angels painted in a style of sculpturism, in a sculpted style, and the inside depicts these same two figures but in a more painted realistic form. The angel and woman are most likely the angel Gabriel and the Virgin Mary. The background depicts a church, and this is similar to the background seen in The Virgin of Chancellor Roland with the grand architecture. Madonna and Child with Canon Horace van der Pijl, painted in 1436. The Mary in this painting is painted very similarly to the Marys in other Van Eyck's works. She wears a long red dress with long hair, soft facial features, and is holding the baby Jesus. The look of Madonna is painted very similarly to the Virgin Mary we saw before. She has a long, textured red dress. However, in this painting, the baby is seen to be close to the Madonna, and this is emphasizing a closeness and sense of comfort between the Madonna and her child. The Madonna is also seated on a throne, and she is surrounded by gold cups and oranges on the windowsill, symbolizing her wealth, which we had also seen oranges depicted in another painting, the Arnolfini portrait by Van Eyck. Also in the 1430s, Jan van Eyck painted St. Barbara in the Dresden Tirpitch. The St. Barbara is painted in a more sketchy style, and she is depicted in a cloudy place void of color in the foreground. However, there is blue and gold in the background, which emphasizes the sky behind her. The Dresden Triptych is a 3-panel painting with the architecture extremely similar to the architecture in Van Eyck's other paintings of Mary. The Mary is also painted similarly, as is the angel Gabriel. In 1437 and 1439, respectively, the Madonna in the church and Madonna at the fountain were painted. While the Mary in the Madonna at the church is depicted similarly to Van Eyck's other paintings, her crown, gown, baby, and the architecture behind her, the Madonna at the fountain is featured outside of a fountain, although she keeps other similarities to other Madonnas in Van Eyck's works, such as the royal iconography of the fountain, the golden fountains, and the angels behind her. However, she is depicted outside with a blue dress. In 1439 through 1441, Jan van Eyck painted Portrait of Margaret van Eyck, Portrait of Christ, and Virgin and Child with Saints and Donor. Portrait of Margaret van Eyck was in a similar style to the women of the Arnolfini portrait, although she is also wearing red and green like many of the women in Van Eyck's portraits, like the Virgin Mary. Portrait of Christ. Like many of Van Eyck's portraits, the background is a stark black, with the focus being on the subject. However, Jesus here is depicted straight on rather than a 3/4 view like many of Van Eyck's other portrait subjects. And the Virgin and Child with Saints and Donors background is similar to many of Van Eyck's other paintings, with wide city and tall arching walls. And the Mary is depicted similarly to Mary at the Garden, with a background behind her, a blue dress, and the kneeling man is depicted similarly to Virgin of Chancellor Roland. Those are my references. Those are also my